Yo, everybody, welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of Something is Killing the Children, Department of Truth, Blue Book, Nightmare Country, The Nice House in the Lake, and the soon-to-launch World Tree at Image Comics. It's James Tynion IV. But this isn't a typical podcast. It's part of our ongoing series of interviews over at Sketched and his Empire of the Tiny Onion Substack. And for this one interview only, it will also run as a podcast. It's a good one as we discuss his work on World Tree and his approach to deciding the right homes for his books. It's a bit different than Off Panel's typical podcast, at least structurally, but I hope you enjoy it. Here we go. So we're talking on Friday, March 24th. We're 4 days after World Tree #1's final order cutoff hit. That's FOC, or the last day comic shops can change their orders for that release. Let's start there. Was it a good week? Was it a great week? What kind of week was it? Do you have a sense as to how orders are looking yet?
So yes, I definitely have that sense, and I am very, very happy. You know, I not woke up around midday on Monday. I was like having a panic attack, because you know I like bugging people at Image to try to get them to give me like where the numbers stand, and even though I know that's bad information for me to have because I'll just start spiraling. And there was this brief moment where it was just like, oh, our number's gonna land like kind of close to where the closet was like last summer, which I didn't do this kind of big push for. But then it was just like the orders kept coming in. And then, you know, like we landed in a really, really good place, especially given the market right now. It's not my highest launch ever, but like my highest launch ever happened in the middle of the speculator boom from 2 years ago. So it's just, you know, did I want to beat that number? Yes, but it's like we had very, very strong numbers, and yeah, like basically by Tuesday morning, all of the friends that I was panic texting on Monday afternoon were like yelling at me for having been anxious about it.
It is interesting, though, because, I mean, that's one of the things we've been talking about in this series of interviews is like the environment's just different. And yes. It can be, you want to compare to your high points and you want to aim for your high points. But the problem is like that high point, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it may not exist in the same way anymore because it's kind of an apples to oranges comparison as far as where the market is, right?
Yes. No, it's honestly kind of remarkable. And I started getting worried about this back in the fall because it's just like World Tree was one that it's like, this is another ongoing series. To do an ongoing series, especially one that I want to run for several years, I knew the range that I wanted to launch in, and it is the range of the books that launched during the period. Like basically, you know, Department of Truth, Nice House on the Lake, they had 6-figure launches, which was like incredible for a creator-owned book. And that gives us a lot of capital, both in terms of the comics market and just in terms of literal cash in hand to keep a book going and keep funding it for the long haul. And it's just like, I knew I needed to pull out all the stops to make this sell the most it could. And I was doing that in a market that was shifting. And with, a collector, the entire collector market has changed rapidly in the last year. It's, for a while, they were sort of picking like one book every month to sort of back. And now we're getting to the point where it feels like they're picking like one book every quarter to back. And it's just like, they're still out there. And that's like, really, that's really cool. But it is, it's not what it was. And that changes the math because it's just like for a little while, I knew that I could rely on that group because they liked my books and all of that. But I had to really consider the value that I was going to be giving them. And I needed to consider like how I gamed out the covers I was doing in order to appeal to them, and also like make sure. And then on top of that, it's just, the comic had to be good and it had to be something that appealed to that group. So like all of those things together kind of led to this last moment. And this is basically what I've been thinking about for a year. And it's remarkable that now, like, we're at another, turning point kind of in my career, because this is sort of everything that I started putting in motion from the second I got the Substack grant. Like, World Tree is the last of the books that I really put into motion right then. And now, Blue Book is in stores. Christopher Chaos has been solicited. Like, World Tree's out, like, coming out. Like, so it's just like we are now entering the next phase. And thankfully, a lot of my, hopes for how this could pan out have panned out.
It's interesting too, because you have the second volume of your Nightmare Country series is launching the same week as World Tree, and like, I don't think you can plan for that. Like, I don't think that you're like, DC, can we launch this the same day as or like same week as my other big book? But in a weird way, that actually kind of reinforces, if somebody goes and gets Nightmare Country on Tuesday, reads it, loves it, they're like, maybe I'll get more from this James Tynion guy if they hadn't read anything. And then what do you have right there? World Tree. Obviously a slightly different flavor. I imagine a different flavor.
I mean, like, Nightmare Country is still like stars a serial killing nightmare, so it's like it is a slightly different flavor, but it comes from a similar place.
It's in the ballpark. But yeah, I am interested in, I just had Steve Anderson from Third Eye Comics, retail chain over on the East Coast, was just on the podcast, and he described World Tree as a monster book about to happen. At least in, like, he was really touting the Peach Momoko 1 in 75 cover you had that was announced right before FOC. You described this book as you're very happy with the result of FOC.
Yeah.
How much do you feel that stems from your plan for it versus like the nature of the book? Like, how much of something like World Tree do you have to kind of like carefully cultivate to become the hit it is versus just naturally becoming the hit it is?
I mean, I think there's a lot of cultivation that needs to happen. We exist in a weird moment in this industry where messaging, what a creator's trying to sell to retailers is really difficult. It's really, really difficult. And then on top of that, like, because of like a giant snowstorm, Image wasn't even at Comics Pro last month, I'm pretty sure. So it's just like, this was a big launch that was about to happen, and the people who were like in a room with all the retailers wasn't able to like say to that group of retailers, hey, you should buy this book. So it was this, like, I'm very glad that I'm in a very privileged position. I have sold a lot of comics over the last few years. I have a large readership of my newsletter, like, in and of itself. So it's just like, I am a fairly like powerful messaging entity, like, just as myself. But it's still one of those things where it's just like, I put out there's so much product out there that has my name on it, that it's just like, how do I message that, like, this is going to be special? And you can start seeing me making moves towards it like 6 months ago. Like, when I wrapped up my first year of the Substack grant, I basically made the decision where it's just like, I need to shift the like value proposition here, where I'm not just trying to sell a newsletter every week. I need the power of my newsletter to sell the comics that I'm using. Right. So I had to change my entire the way I messaged the newsletter and how I like did everything, because it's just like, what really matters are the like store sales in stores. Mm-hmm. Like that was the like main thing. And then it was also just like, okay, the collector market isn't showing up for everything anymore. How can I get them to show up for this book? And thankfully, the book has a character who's very appealing to that market, where, we have a sexy murder lady. Like, that's, it's one of the best things you can have to sell a book. And it was just like, and I knew that it was just like, okay, how can we introduce the collector market to this character? And so I came up with the idea of like, how I released the variant covers in stages rather than having them all in the initial like solicit dump, so that I could hit like over the course of a month and a half leading up to FOC, like just an increasing awareness of these covers. And then on top of that, you can sort of see that it's like the way I staggered them and it's the way that I structured the incentives is that the higher incentive books are mostly appeal to just the collector base. And the lower incentive books sort of appeal to a broader like comic space. Those are just like cool comics artists who I love. Like our Bill Sienkiewicz cover is a 1 in 25 cover. And it's like we all like everyone loves Bill Sienkiewicz. I fucking love that cover. But it's just like the higher cover is Zoo Orzu, who is very popular right now in the collector market. And then the highest tier is basically me leaving the 1 in 100s are for like for the people who have been collecting my books in particular. Those are the homage covers to my previous titles. So it's like if you have bought in and you have been collecting basically my whole library, here's a special treat for you if you buy in. And these are going to be the rarest covers that exist for this thing. And I'm not iterating on them. I'm not letting retailers do like, a virgin variant of any of them. Like those will be the only iterations of those covers. And I want to preserve how rare they are, and make sure they're special. And then the other thing is just like I reached out to Peach like months and months and months ago, Peach Momoko, to do one of these variants, and it's just like, okay, this is going to be the FOC drop variant, and then it's also like, and even though there was always like a weird gap because it went from a 1 in 50 to 1 in 100. But it was just like I wanted to do like I wanted her to be the 1 in 75, and part of that is I wanted anyone who wanted that cover had to redo all the math like right on the last day. So it's just like suddenly you have to like ask yourself questions of like where all of your numbers are that, rather than just sort of do like a simple multiplier. I also had an instinct very early on that the collector market would change, and I on my own books, like there are higher incentive variants on some of my Boom stuff because I don't have direct control over that. But I've never been comfortable going above a 1 in 100. Like the thing that I like the 1 in 100 because basically it's if you order like a retailer variant, which normally has a minimum order of like 500. If you order a retailer variant of this book, that means you get 5 of the really rare cover. That feels like a fair, like that's the special treat you get. And that feels like a fair ask. Once you get up to the like 1 in 500 covers, it's like, like, am I really creating something that's going to have that much inherent value? Is the value going to go up? Because essentially, like, the internal math you can do in your head is an incentive that like a 1 in 100 you should be able to sell for $100. Like a 1 in 75 you should be able to sell for $75. Like that's like a useful metric to like keep in your head. And it's just the like World Tree is something that we already have like media interest. We already have like, and a lot of my stuff's moving in media and all of that. Like the idea that one of my books is going to increase in value is not crazy. So yeah, it's like but I wanted to contain it. And I wanted to appeal to that group. And basically our whole cover plan for the first 5 issues is built on appealing to that group.
Well, I want to talk about the other part of the comic, which is the inside of the comic for a little bit, because let me just walk through what it is for people who don't know. World Tree is your new Image comic series with artist Fernando Blanco, colorist Jordi Belair, and letterer Leticia Bidikar. I have a lot of thoughts about it and I want to talk about it, but before we go into here's the solicit for the first issue so everyone knows what we're talking about. In 1999, Gabriel and his friends discovered the Undernet, a secret architecture to the internet. They charted their exploration on a message board called World Tree. Then they lost control. Someone broke into World Tree, someone who welcomed the violent hold the Undernet had on them. At great personal cost, Gabriel and the others thought they had sealed the Undernet away for good. They were wrong. And now they will know the meaning of fear. Ooh, good ending. let's talk about the story behind the book because I just need to talk about it. As I told you immediately after I read it, it might be the worst thing you've ever written, and it also might be the best thing you've ever written in the sense that it's absolutely incredible, but it's also very upsetting. I mean, I wrote my newsletter today, as I told you before. It's probably the best first issue I've read in 2 years, and it's genuinely very exciting. That's one of the things I think is interesting is I think that it is one of the rare books that does a very good job of specifically cultivating the collector market, but also has the potential to be a word of mouth hit, which is a very tough line to walk. But let's talk about the origin. Like, this is a really intense book. It's very intense. What's the origin of World Tree, and why was it a story you wanted to tell?
I mean, the origin is kind of as brutal as the comic itself. Like, when I was making the move from California back out to New York about 4 years ago, my partner at the time, they were having me listen to a few episodes of the podcast Sword and Scale, which is not like, I have a lot of negative feelings towards that podcast in general. I'm not endorsing it, but it is there was a 2-part episode about the serial killer Luca Magnotti, who basically killed someone on camera and posted it online. And part of that, and this is the thing that really messed me up, is in the second part of that 2-parter, they started showing that it briefly became a shock video that was being spread around and people were doing reaction videos to the murder.
Oh my God.
And not even necessarily knowing that it was a real murder thing. And they were playing the voices of the people reacting to it. And one of the voices was so young that I had to hit stop on the podcast just right there. And it was one of the most viscerally upsetting things that I've ever listened to. I don't recommend people going out and listening to this thing. This is something I listened to once and it just festered in my brain for years. And I've always been fascinated with what the internet is doing to us and what it is doing to our brains. And one of my earliest creator-owned comics is a book called Mimetic, which is about an image posted online that ends the world in 3 days. And it's basically the larger meta comment there was that things are spreading so much more rapidly online than we can process whether or not they are good for us or bad for us. And this is sort of the ideological evolution of that story. It's where I'm sort of taking it to the next level. And it's that. And then it's you can also see the very strong Stephen King influence. And then it's also just and I mean, I'm using there's a part of the setup in the format is it's me doing a riff on it. And also 20th Century Boys is big in its DNA, which uses a similar format. But it's ultimately it won't be shaped too closely, but it's I wanted it to be paced kind of like a Stephen King novel, which means I want it to be long.
I'm very happy that you said I feel like the Stephen King part is obvious just because Gabriel and his friends having to deal with it as young people and then having to deal with it as adults also. But my unnecessarily ridiculous elevator pitch / comparison concept for it was it's it meets The Net, the 1990s Sandra Bullock movie, but if clicking the pi symbol in the corner of the internet opened the gateway to hell from Event Horizon. So
yeah, no, that is a great. I love that. I'm going to steal that. That's really good.
It's very complicated, but it's just at the same time, as soon as I was oh my God, that's perfect. That is it. But the it thing is really interesting because Stephen King's always a pretty big influence on you, right? This is the one where it feels it's you can kind of see the elements. It's Gabriel and his friend's part is the it part. And then there's the part that kind of builds off the podcast you're talking about. And then it's, I don't know. I mean, I guess we've kind of talked about this in the past. A lot of your ideas are kind of, this was an idea and this was an idea and this was an idea. But at the root, there's this really pure thing. And then it kind of all gets smashed in together into World Tree.
Yes. No, and that's exactly how it happened. And and it is the idea of like, and the other thing that I really wanted to play with is the aesthetics of the Y2K aesthetics, the turn into the millennium, like that. That's when I came of age. That's when like I remember, like, just by remembering the pre-social media internet and what I hoped the internet would do to the world, and then what the internet has actually done to the world, I wanted to tell a story about that tension. And this is it's the like you, and that's why there are multiple generations in this book. Like, you have the older generation that had that initial optimism, but then saw something at it, like something rotten at the dark heart of it. And then you see the people who have only grown up with the dark heart of it. And
how it's changed them.
Yes, and it's changed. Yeah.
I mean, I do think that was one of the interesting things that I felt as I was reading it, because, as I told you, there was this one specific scene in it where, when I read it, I was like, I don't know if I can keep reading this comic. Like, straight up. And I don't mean, like, that's not a judgment. That's just, like, it was intense. And when I was reading around that point, I was like, this feels like it's going to be a very specialized book. Like, it's going to have a narrow audience who can kind of handle that stuff. But at the same time, by the end, I kind of come to realize that, like, this type of horror, like, we talked before about the universality of fear and, like, why horror works so well. This type of horror, where it's like about the fear of the internet and how it's breaking everything and ruining people, it feels very universal. And it's interesting to hear your kind of perspective on it, because it's the type of thing that, when you look at the details, it feels very specialized, but that when you look at the entire idea, you realize that, like, anybody can read this and see today in it in a very real way.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I do want to hit a nerve. Like, that is absolutely the goal. But it also doesn't scare me. Like, and this might just be, confirmation bias, but it's just like, my most successful series, like, by far, is Something is Killing the Children, in which, like, a literal child is ripped in half in the first issue, like, on panel. And that is my most successful book. So it was just like, this comes at it. It's totally different. I don't want to pretend they're the same thing, but it is just like one of those things where I don't like flinching away from the really ugly parts, because I think that the contrast between the ugliness and the darkness actually allows for the more human moments to be more human. And frankly, it's just my taste, and it's how I like to write. That I have a strong stomach for it, and I think even the people who, like, need to sort of peek through their fingers for a few pages, like, I still think that the cast of characters, like, the core cast of characters, if you like Nice House on the Lake, the way that these characters interact and build, and the way that the humanity of those characters, I think, is going to be familiar to you, and I think you're going to really enjoy. I also think that there will be moments that are going to be brutal and frightening, but I think we live in a brutal and frightening world, and I don't want to flinch away from that.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. The comics crowdfunding platform Zoop is stacked with some great campaigns in April, with Mark A. Nelson's fantastically beautiful sci-fi story Thunder Hunters, a wild project from up-and-coming Italian artist Marco Fontanilli that you'll have to see to believe, and the Won't Back Down anthology spearheaded by the legendary Trina Robbins to benefit Planned Parenthood. There are other live campaigns and some huge launches coming in May to sign up for, so check out zoop.gg for more. It takes less than 30 seconds to sign up, and the e-commerce style checkout is streamlined and intuitive. Add multiple rewards and add-ons into your cart, provide some info during checkout, and you're done. No confusing additional steps in finalizing your pledge, and no post-campaign surveys. For all of you creators looking to crowdfund your project, Zoop is currently open for submissions. Email them at hello@wearezoop.com to start a campaign. And now, back to the show. I think the one thing that distinguishes it from Something is Killing the Children in terms of, like, the violence side, though, and I'm not, this isn't me trying to talk people out. It's great, and everyone should read it.
Yeah.
But it feels very personal. And I think it's because the way that Fernando draws it and the way it's set up with like kind of like the live stream type thing and everything like that.
Yeah.
But I do want to say my favorite characters so far, I'm very invested in Gabriel and his gang, like getting stuff sorted. I like how you have this kind of pocket of just like theoretical heroes, and like the main guy, for some reason in my head, just seems like a Wildstorm character. I'm like looking at Gabriel. I'm like, this guy is going to get stuff sorted out. I trust this guy.
When I talk about like Y2K aesthetic, like what comics like are the ones that capture that more than anything? Like,
yeah, he seems like the second Winter from Stormwatch or something like that. It's like, oh, we need a new Winter. Let's get this Gabriel guy.
And I mean, like the second issue introduces like a badass like FBI agent with an eye patch. Like we're
oh my
like,
god,
we are having fun here. Like the character Fear in and of like just in herself, like this like terrifying naked tattooed lady who's just like murdering folks. Like this is a comic book. Like we are making a comic book here. There are going to be like visually dynamic and interesting characters throughout. And then there's going to be very grounded human characters throughout. And there's like there's the core premise, which is basically there's an evil internet that lives beneath the internet. And it's just like, and it's trying to like end the world. Like it's all stuff I love. Like this is
it's funny. It's you talking about it. I'm just like, I'm kind of piecing certain things together in my head. And I'm going from like, I mean, it's still intense, but I'm also like, this is also kind of fun. Like, here's one of the things I think is really funny about it. So I was a big player of Counter-Strike back in the day. Do you know what Counter-Strike is?
Yes.
Yeah. So I played a lot of Counter-Strike back in the day, and you would use Leet Speak. Do you know what Leet Speak is?
Yes.
So I assumed you did, given the fact
title and Fear. Like,
people don't necessarily know what the name for that is. But anyways, it's funny though, because Leet Speak was rooted in Y2K era. And it's funny because one of the things is I was thinking in my head, I'm like, why is it called, why is all this in Leet Speak? Why is the title in Leet Speak? Why is World Tree in Leet Speak? Why is Fear in Leet Speak? And the inciting incident was based in the time when Leet Speak existed, was most popular.
Yep.
I had not connected that. Magic is happening right now, James. I'm loving it.
There we go. I'm glad. But I mean, that's entirely it. Like it was an affectation. Like World Tree is called World Tree because it's named after a website that a bunch of 18-year-olds like came up with in 1999. And it's like, that's why it has the numbers and all of it. And, we are now living in a cultural moment that is weirdly nostalgic of that Y2K era. So it's just like, this is going to lean right into that.
Here's a fascinating thing. You're the second, when this airs, this will be the second straight podcast that will discuss Y2K because it's a kind of somewhat critical plot point in the story. Never would have planned on that, but that's just kind of how it worked. It's Erica Henderson and Ryan North's Danger and Other Unknown Risks. The inciting incident for that entire story is Y2K. And it's in the air, man. It's in the air. I do want to say, Fear is such a fascinating character because, well, there's a number of reasons. I will say, one of the top 5 most normal things about her in the first issue is the fact that she's a nudist. And, like, that's like, we're talking about an abnormal person. If you're like, that part about her seems relatively normal. The fact that she's nude all the time, basically. It's interesting though, because she's the key, right? She's like the one that unlocks the book.
Yeah, no. And I mean, like, this is it's fascinating because it's just like only having the first issue. And I mean, this is something that I try to do with a lot of my first issues is I don't like we don't explain what the premise of the book is in the first issue.
But you do give a hook.
Yeah, there is 100% a hook. Like, there is always, like, you get the gist. And I think that's all you really need. Like, all you really need is that sort of gist. But it's just like, it's something that I realized all the way back, like, with Something is Killing the Children. Erica Slaughter isn't named until issue 3 of that book. Like, you do not have a name for that character and then the first time you get that name, it might be a totally made up like name. You have no idea. And so beyond, like, I've always known, and you don't know what the House of Slaughter isn't named until issue 5. Nice House on the Lake, like Nice House on the Lake, you do get the central premise, but you don't really understand any of the hows and whys. And I think a lot of people get lost in the hows and whys. In this point, you sort of get you see the cast of characters, you see the sort of the inciting incident, and like you're kind of left with the what the fuck is happening. And it's just like that was way more important to me. And is also like, this is a bit of my own Y2K nostalgia. Like that was Lost. Lost just like left you with a like, what the fuck is happening? I need to tune in next week and find out. And it's just like that is so burned into the how and why I create what I create.
Really quick, I just want to say that I do think that one thing that really works about this issue too is that, like, I love Nice House, but the cast is big, and so it takes you a bit to get your kind of head around them. But in this one, it's kind of like by the end of the issue, you may not know where they're going, but you know that Gabriel and his crew is going to have a journey, and
Yes.
you know that Ellison Lane is going to have a journey, and they may touch on each other, they may intersect, they may interact, they may do a lot of things, but you know that there's a path for them. And it's in that sense, it's like it's a good chunk long read, but you have a very narrow and clear identity to where the characters could be going from here. Where that actually is uncertain. And I think that that's one of the things is like, it leaves you definitely being like, I want to know more about what's going to happen next with these guys.
Yeah. No, and I mean, like, I feel like that's such a important job of, like, of doing a comic, especially one that's coming out in periodicals. Like, this is, I don't know. I want to, like, this is a book that I think will read very well in trade, but it's like, it's also a book that I hope, maybe not with the same, like, Nice House on the Lake was very much like we threw big curveballs like at the end of like a lot of different issues. And I'm not saying there's going to be a big curveball at the end of every single issue here, but it is one of those things where it's just like, there are some curveballs coming, and you are going to be best served by reading this monthly, not waiting for the trade. And it's just like, if you don't want it spoiled for you, if you don't want like any of that, then you should read the book. And it's just like that feels like such a fundamental like premise of like trying to get people into serialized storytelling that I feel like we don't see that often in comics. Mm-hmm. Saga does it like really, really well. So it's just like, you want to be caught up on Saga, like, so that, like, your friends who are reading Saga don't say it. And it was like, especially early Hickman X-Men stuff, it's like, you wanted to stay on top of that. You did not want the internet to spoil it for you. It is just one of those things where it's like, how can you create that feeling, which then gets people in the door. And the more people who are talking about the book, the more people read the book. Like, and it goes through waves. Like, one thing that I'm really happy about now is I'm seeing a lot more issue to issue chatter on like Something is Killing the Children than I did necessarily a year ago, because I think a lot of people came into that through the trades. Like, we had a huge collector audience, and we had but it was the volume 1 coming out, and then basically, selling as well as it did for 2 years. And then it's just like the people who show up at the comic shop, like, like only necessarily like 5 times a year, they would get the next volume each time. And then they were like, you know what? I want to know what's happening, like, a bit faster. Mm-hmm. And, now I'm getting like, anytime someone's like asking me about characters who are only in the like most recent 2 arcs, it's just like that means a lot to me. It just shows that there's like a core readership to the book. And it's just like, I want to cultivate those core readerships.
I think one of the things that people don't really understand sometimes about comics is, I'm not saying getting people to read a number 1 is easy, but it's easier than getting people to read a number 2. And like, the thing is, and I told you before we started recording this, that I've not been feeling that energy. Like I kind of feel like I've been almost like talking myself into some books that I normally would be like semi excited about. And with this one, the interesting thing is I finished it and I was like, I want number two. Like that was a feeling I haven't had necessarily in a while. And I think it all kind of comes down to how you kind of build the book to hook the readers and get them in on number two. So that brings up a really good question. Like, what's your approach to a first issue like this? Like, what's the key to making it pop and not just telling a good story, because there are a lot of good stories out there, but one that will draw readers back for number two?
I mean, there's a special magic to it. The biggest thing, then, like, this is what I start with all the time, is like I start with the vibe of the comic. Like I know the feeling that I'm trying to sell, like more than anything. And I've probably written a few sentences together of what needs to happen, like plot wise, by the end of the first issue. I knew, but it's like the first time I wrote, and this is part of how I build things. It's like the first time I wrote like an outline of the first arc of World Tree, the character Fear didn't exist yet. Like she like, what she represents existed in the story, but that was like I hadn't figured her out. So it was one of those things where once I went to actually start writing the thing, I realized that it's just like, okay, like now we have the central figure. She needs to be like this, like we need to see her be fucking terrifying in the like first few pages of the book, and like she needs to own the finale. And it's just like because it's just like basically, a structure of an issue is the start of an issue asks a question and the end of the issue answers it. And it's just like, you want to build something satisfying that kind of fits that rough shape. And I don't know, it's like, I wish I could say that there was like some magic formula that I followed or anything, but it's just like, the real thing is I just spend a lot of time on my first issues. Like they are the most fundamentally important thing that I work on. Like more than because the first issue and the first cover is even a part of that, where it's just like the first cover is going to be the first image that 90% of people see of the book, and it's just like that needs to grab you. And then it's just like reading the issue, that's going to be the only shot that most people give you. And then even the people who end up picking it up in the trade, if you can't capture them in the first like 20, 30 pages of that book, they're not going to finish it. So it's just like that it is the most important piece. And over, I feel like there isn't like, there are a lot of books that I read that don't tell you what they are up front. And it always bothers me. And I don't mean that. And like I already spoke earlier about, it's like, that's not about telling you what the plot is, but it's just like, what is the feeling of the book? What is it going to be? What is the experience of reading this book going to be month to month? And it's just like, I think over the course of World Tree, we show you all of that. I think that, like World Tree, Nice House, Department of Truth, Something is Killing the Children. They all really do that in a very concentrated way, where it's just like they are essentially the pilot episode, where it's just like the whole premise of the series is packed into that. And that doesn't mean it's fully explained or anything, but the whole premise is right there. And so it's just like for the people who only ever check this out, like it sells them the book. And it's, I don't know, it's knowing that like your job is you're pitching a reader. Like you're pitching them to come back later. And if you don't have like a desire to do that, like, I don't know, there's something I find like kind of egotistical about like, just expecting, it's like, no, they'll be back for issue 2. I don't need to give them like, anything here.
I mean, you got to give them a reason. I will say, we have to mention, I mean, like character work and storytelling in the visuals is absolutely brilliant. And there's like Fernando and Shorty completely nail the scary moments, but there's also these moments, like there's a moment at the end where a character named Gibson Lane views the undernet, and it's just this like iconic splash page that just looks just amazing. And that's a big part of it too, is like there's a version of this book that doesn't work because some of like the kind of more kind of talky grid bits don't necessarily like pop in the same way because like the artist isn't right for it, or some of like the big standout moments aren't as standout. And Fernando just nails all of them. I mean, to be honest, Fernando, you worked with him on Justice League Dark, was that it?
Briefly on Justice League Dark and a little bit on Batman Eternal. But it's just like I've always loved his work, and I've always gotten along with him really, really well.
The thing that I find really amazing about some of the sometimes the people that you work with is like, somebody like him or like Alvaro. It's like Alvaro on Nice House is just absolutely insane. It's just like some of the best stuff you will ever see. And going into it, I guess I don't normally see that in their work. And it's like, I don't know, like you see something in their work that's not being necessarily touched on because they're doing like the typical for hire stuff. And that's not to diminish their work there, but it's just like this stuff that Fernando's doing here is just unbelievable.
Well, and I think a lot of it is I know, in pretty clear terms, like what my strengths are as a writer. And what like, and then when I work with, when I'm working with an artist, I see it's like, do you nail what I do well? And the second that I see that, I'm just like, okay, I want to work more with you. Because it's just like in Fernando from the very beginning, it was just like, you're doing really interesting things with the pages. I like how you draw the characters. I like how I like the feeling of the emotional moments, but also the tense moments. Because a lot of my writing relies on kind of controlling the emotions of the piece. And the best way to control the emotions of the piece is through the emotions of the characters and the acting of the characters. And the artists that I work best with are the artists who do acting very well, and can capture that feeling very, very well. And it's just like and I think a huge part of it, and I mean, I think this is why I work with a lot of Europeans, is there is this mixture of like influence from the American comic market, manga, and then European comics. So there is no fear of information density, and there is also no fear of just doing reaction shots of characters and stuff like that, where it's just I don't work necessarily very well with a lot of artists who sort of came up in the purely superhero 90s scene, because it's just it is a type of action storytelling that I don't excel at. And I never have, and I don't think necessarily I will. The stuff that I've done best is what I write plot style, and then adapt after, and just sort of let the artist go to town. But for something like this, it requires much more deliberate pacing. And the characters the artists who can carry that tension, I lock into them, and then it's just like, okay, let's do a book. That book might not come out for 3 or 4 years, but I want to do a book with you.
Yeah.
And it's just been years of expanding that list, and having conversations, because effectively always it takes at least 2 years from the first conversation of let's do a creator own for it to come out in stores. And that is the shortest, the only time it's ever been shorter than that has been The Closet, which was me trying to prove that I could make it happen faster than that. And even that took a year, and that was only a 3-issue mini. So it's just that. That's a big part of it.
I want to ask about where it ended up, because you've been doing books at a number of different places lately. Dark Horse, you just had Blue Book launch, and you got Christopher Chaos coming up. Boom, you obviously have a wave of books there. DC clearly doing things. You even have a creator-owned book in a Nice House over there. It's at Image. Why was Image the right home for World Tree?
I mean, one one of the benefits is I knew how to sell this book. Image gives you the most control as a creator. And, gives you is like maybe a generous way of phrasing it. Image requires of you to like have that kind of control. It is, and I knew stage by stage how I wanted to sell this book. I had a very good sense that, I was going to earn that money back pretty quickly. I was willing to take that risk on myself and put it out into the world. Everything that I'm doing right now is like, right now I'm kind of testing what I want to do with the next steps of my career and where I want my books to land. And that was the really nice thing about the Substack titles, is I was able to build them kind of in absence of a publisher. And so I was able to really start thinking of Tiny Onion Studios, my entity, that's, becoming a more and more formalized entity, like month to month. But it's just like this, Tiny Onion Studios I see as a comic book production studio. We do not have an exclusive agreement with any publisher, but we do have deals with publishers that, like, I'll do a line of books here, I'll do a line of books there. And part of that is me feeling out like, okay, 10, 20 years from now, where do I want my library? Like, who's going to manage my library best? And there are only a few places that give you the amount of control that Image has. Like, and Dark Horse is giving me a lot of control, especially because those books weren't funded by Dark Horse. They were funded by me through the Substack grant. So it is just like I have an extraordinary amount of control over those series, and I'm still funding those books myself. And that means that anytime, like, and this is true of any like creative ventures, the more that you've invested in the book, the more you get on the back end.
Right.
And so it's creating a kind of multi-tier system where I'm able to like test out like where everything's coming. And it's also just like, it's a security blanket. It's making sure that if at any moment, like one of these publishers just like ceased existing, or like, like one of the distributors ceased existing, and like some of my publishers only work with one distributor. So it's just like, how can I make sure things keep coming out? Because that's my income requires those books to keep coming out like that. That's just how it works.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. It's Bad Idea Comics, and surprising absolutely no one, the renegade direct-to-retailer publisher that's always doing wild things is again doing wild things. Not satisfied to just drop comics like Matt Kint, Ramon Villalobos, and Tamara Bonville's They're All Terrible, or Matt Kint and Louis LaRosa's Megalith the old-fashioned way, they've continued to drop their Secret Six titles, or comics they make incredibly difficult to find by being sneaky about it, with Playtime, a new comic from the great Mike Carey and Jonathan Weishak that they dropped at Comics Pro. What might be next? Who knows? It's Bad Idea. They're crazy. Keep an eye out, or you might miss the next Bad Idea comic altogether. And now, back to the show. Well, and this is what we talked about a little last time, where we talked about the balanced breakfast approach, right? Where it's like you work with multiple publishers to insulate and protect you, but also to kind of experiment within the system and see if there's better choices out there. And it gives you information, it gives you protection, and it gives you a bit of insulation from the whims of the market to some degree.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like right now at this point in my career, I'm not interested in becoming a publisher in and of myself. I did that with Razor Blades, and what that taught me is I don't want the printing costs and distribution logistics on my, like, I don't want to have to worry about that. That is like, it is a level of complexity that's, like, it's better to go through a publisher that is putting out so many books that they have a much lower like rate. Like, you get a much better back end when you are like entering in a group rate.
So I mean, sometimes isn't the process of going through something like this whether it's World Tree or Razor Blades or whatever, you know, a lot of people probably think about it, you cultivating what you know you want to do, but sometimes it cultivates what you don't want to do and makes that abundantly clear.
Yeah. No, and I mean like that's huge. And then sometimes it's just people. Sometimes it's like, oh, I like this system better, but I like this person better, and my life is going to be easier if I'm interacting with this person and not that person. Like, you know, it's because the human element of this is huge. It's really, really huge.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because the balanced breakfast approach, when we were back in like December, I was in Texas. I'm pretty sure you were in Brooklyn. We were talking about what we were going to be doing for these interview series. And I'm pretty sure it came up originally because I just asked you straight up, like, why Dark Horse? Because I think that was something a lot of people were surprised by when you announced that your Substack books were going to end up there, because it seemed, I mean, the natural pairing there seems like Image and Substack, because both allow you to retain 100% of the rights. But it seems to me that in a way that I didn't expect, the Substack deal unlocked the possibility of Dark Horse because you had already funded the books and it allowed you to take more on the back end. Do you think those books would have ended up at Dark Horse without that Substack deal?
It would have been harder to convince me to do that, like, unless I had an equivalent amount of money funding the books, like, in another way. But I mean, it's just like right now, the way that I'm thinking about building my whole next generation of titles is like, I am funding these books outside the system. And then and occasionally I will take partnerships that further fund my system. And then that allows me to create more books and like do like more cool stuff. I'm not going to the only instance in which I would give up like a piece of the like central rights of the title is if I'm getting something of equal or greater value in return for that exchange. Which, you know, I have a partnership that is doing that, and like I'm excited to see what comes of it. But it is just the like I'm I'm excited to continue existing kind of outside the system, like build outside the system, sell into the system. That feels like a business model that I work well with. And you know, I like, and part of it is just like I don't really like asking permission to do what I think like how to make the books the way I want to make the books. And I would rather build the books, find the right home for them. Like, and I mean, like Dark Horse in particular, like look at the series I'm doing. I'm doing a line of like, UFO and like true weird books, and it's just like, those make sense to like be on a shelf next to Hellboy. And you know what else makes sense to be like on the shelf next to Hellboy is like the superhero adjacent horror comic that's basically like a gay teen Hellboy. So it's just like Dark Horse already knows how to sell books like that to bookstores around the country. And then on top of that, because Dark Horse has such great penetration in the book market, because they never gave up the game on manga, like Berserk is like still this massive global hit. And it's just like, and Dark Horse retains the American rights, which means that any bookstore in the country that stocks Berserk is also like being, there's someone trying to upsell them copies of Blue Book and copies of Hellboy and copies of Christopher Chaos. And it's just like, that made sense to me, because it's just like, I know I have a strong enough, following in the direct market that those books, like, I think will have good success, like in single issues. But I think those will, like, the best thing for Blue Book is just like, that's going to be a book that does well in libraries. Like, it's a book that it's just like, hey, you're kind of interested in UFOs and you want to read like a cool comic about like the Betty and Barney Hill abduction. Here's the comic. Like, it's like, you're fascinated about a thing. Here's the thing that explains the thing you're fascinated in. It's a very direct, like, play. And so, I didn't need that to happen over at Image, where frankly, I would need to control a lot more of how those sit. Like, making that sales point. And then on top of that, like you have the Oming's entire library pretty much right now is over at Dark Horse. Now with all of Powers over there through the Jinx World line. And it made sense to me. And then on top of that, it's like I also learned like the magic trick early on that if you have multiple publishers publishing your different titles, it means they don't pick the titles that are going to sell and the titles that aren't. Because, Dark Horse wants to beat Image, wants to beat like Boom, wants to beat DC. So it's just like all of them are putting their A game in to try to sell the most comics possible. I write so many books that it's just like if I went all in one place, it's just like, they're like I would have to choose which book I want to sell.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing on the Dark Horse front. This is an experiment. Until I start getting the back end checks, I can't tell you for sure that this experiment has worked.
Yeah.
Right now I like the human element of it and it all makes sense to me. But until I start getting those checks on the back end, like I can't tell you whether or not like this has been a successful business experiment or if this is going to be something that I'm like going to be pissed off about for the duration of that contract.
This brings up a good question. Like how much information... Okay, how much does it change publisher to publisher, the information you get about how your books are doing? Because like in previous conversations, it seems like the answer is it varies greatly. Is that the case?
Hugely. And it's like, and frankly, at this point, I don't think I'd work with a publisher where I don't have a direct line to someone who can pull up a file on their computer and tell me how much a book sold on the day that I know they have that information. Because I know the day that they have that information. Like I know how the market works. And it's just like, yes, I know there is someone at your company that knows exactly how many copies this book sold. And I want that information.
It's really interesting though, because, let's say it operates like you're working with, I don't know how every publisher works, but I know that sometimes it's like there's a royalty thing where you'll get like kind of paid like 6 months later. I guess that's how Image works. But let's say everybody works like that for some reason. If that was the only time, let's say 6 months after the book dropped was the only time you would get information as to how your book did, how are you supposed to determine what success looks like and where you're going from here? Because it makes it really difficult to determine whether or not your book is working whatsoever.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly hard. And I mean, like that is the gamble. That's why the last 6 months have been freaking me out with World Trade. Like even with like even at my level, I've invested a tremendous amount of money into this book. I like know what I've sold in the past, but I know that the market has shifted. And I also know that it's just like I know how many like months before the issue comes out that I need to finish the issue. And I know like how many months after the issue comes out that the first check comes in. So it's just like, no matter what, it's like fronting, like you have to be able to float the funds of the book for, like for a while, like 9 months, without seeing a penny come back in on it. And you have to like, I can do that because my other books are selling. Like, and that's been the math for a while. I was able to do that on Department of Truth because Batman, like I was getting my Batman checks. Like I was able to do that on, this generation of books because I was getting my Department of Truth checks. Like, and now like this generation of books will like be funded by what comes next. So
it's interesting because I feel like in a lot of ways you would have to approach World Tree as an Image book differently than like Christopher Chaos and Blue Book as Dark Horse releases, both because the latter are funded by Substack, but also because of just how the publishers work. But then on top of that, I mean, what you're describing is like you're having to sequence things to create your own cash flow, right?
Yes.
That's interesting. I've had a lot of conversations about this type of stuff, and I've never really thought about how differently each publisher handles things and because of how paychecks hit and everything like that. It's unless you sequence it right, you could have really high times and really low times.
You sure can.
You're like, I know this way too well.
You really, really sure can. Like I don't know, man. It is especially like, it's also the different companies require different, like, you to work ahead at different rates. So it's just like Dark Horse works at an entirely different system. So I'm paying for covers for the, like, people aren't going to see for like almost a year right now. And it's just like, I'm not going to make that money back for a while. Uh, and it's just like, yeah, this is why, I need an assistant. I need like, because I think I'm doing it all like almost correct. That is the thing that I keep like reassuring myself.
Almost correct. I love
Yeah,
it.
I'm pretty sure that it's just like everything, like how I've structured it all is about like 85 to 90% correct. And it's just like, and at some point I will get the penalty of that 10% wrong that I am. But it's just like, okay, but I'm fairly confident it's only going to be about 10% wrong. But it is just like, but those moments like genuinely happen. Like right now I'm dealing with like a tax situation because I was traveling so much in the fall that there was one tax bill that I thought was paid that wasn't paid. And, it turns out that New York State doesn't like when you do that. Uh, and, like I'm like, and like I have the cash in hand to pay it and all of that. But then there's like I have to go head to head with a bureaucracy and lose 3 days, like that, that then like, which also affects my cash flow.
Well, God, this is like the least artistic and sexy way I could ever describe it. But your blue book thing, where it's like you're getting the cover made for something you're not going to see anything on for over a year. It sounds like you're basically making comic book versions of like the bonds you would get from your grandma when you were a kid, where it's like, if you wait a year, Sonny, this is going to be worth like $5,000. And
yeah, no, I mean that it's exactly that. And it's a privilege to be in the position to be able to float the cash to, like, that I know, like right now I know I have the sales power to make them, like, I doubt I'm going to be in the red. I would do like, but like, am I going to make a profit and be able to do the next thing? And it's just like, that's the question that I'm always, that's an entire question mark. And then on top of that, it's just like, because my entire income is based on like how many books I sell, it's just like I have no idea what I'm going to make year to year.
well, and the other thing too is like all of this is why it'd be difficult to do this like 5 years ago, 7 years ago, whenever, because it's like you have to be insulated from this sort of thing. But I just have a couple more questions. I did want to talk about FOC in specific because, that gives you an idea as to how like World Tree #1 worked, and you have an idea as to just how well it worked, to the point where your friends are like, you're crazy, you never need to be stressed out about this, it's fine. How much do you do with the results of a book like that to guide what comes next? Like, will you kind of pick apart the data as much as possible, find what covers move the needle, find out how far that pushed you up, and use that going forward with other books? Or is it more, this was a success or this wasn't a success and that was that?
I'd say it's more gestural like that. It is like, it isn't something where the central feeling of the result is more more important than what cover D sold. Like, if like, unless there's like a real, like, oh, this like one cover didn't sell at all for some reason, like, unless there's that, like, that I'll notice 100%. But like, other than that, I'm looking to find out like the shape of how things are doing. Because once again, it's just like, I need to know that generally speaking, I'm gonna have the cash in hand, like, when it starts flowing in later in the year, to, continue paying for the next things and the next issues of this book. And I need to know that, and I need to know right now if I'm not going to, because that means that I need to make sure that I'm not going to be, responsible for paying X in July if I don't have a check coming in July. So, I mean, it's like, those are the things that they're very difficult to track. And it's, I'm not always the best at tracking that, but I think I am like, 85 to 90% correct in how I track them.
That's better than the lower numbers. It's very good. But I do think it's interesting to look at all of this through the prism of the kind of other things that you've been doing, because like you have your own platforms like the Empire of the Tiny Onion Substack with your Onion Club, and then you also have the Shop Tiny Onion online store. You also have...
Oh, I was just going to say, now I've moved the whole Onion Club apparatus over to Third Eye. It's no longer through Substack.
Oh, okay. So the Onion Club is over through Third Eye. But you also have like assorted other things you're doing all the time that we don't know about, like Hollywood things and whatnot. But it is interesting because we talked about this last time we chatted, where this stuff is what kind of insulates you to some degree. It's like, I don't know where you stand in terms of like earnings off of all these things, but all this stuff, like let's say Blue Book doesn't pop like you hope it did. And like, let's say that money doesn't turn around for that cover you commissioned for a year from now and everything like that. Is that part of the reason why it's important to have these things? Is it kind of protects you? Like, does it change the arithmetic of what success looks like? Or is all of that more of a small but additive part of what you do?
I mean, the answer is both, but it's definitely, it's cumulative. As long as, I can continue paying both my own personal bills, and I continue funding these books, and then maybe saving a little bit of money and like, buying some like pricey comics and like going out to a few nice dinners. Like I don't have kids. I don't have like right now I'm able to take these sorts of risks, and one leg of like, when you have 8 legs on a stool, like if one gives, the stool, you can still rest on the stool. Like, and that is important to me. It doesn't mean that I can be careless about it. But I mean, there are projects like, and things that I do where my central motive is just not to lose money, because I definitely have my books that I know are my profit books. And then I have my books that I know are the like, this is something that I want to do, and I don't want to be losing money hand over fist. But it's just like, I know, like, I know it's not going to be like a tremendous revenue generator.
That makes sense. I mean, it's all about, I mean, it goes back to the cash flow thing, right? It's just like, it's all like the chair you're talking about with having all the different legs, and it's setting yourself up so if rainy day comes, you got an umbrella for yourself.
Yes. No, and I mean, like, and I think that's the, going back to our last conversation, it's, that's the thing that happened in, the pandemic, where it was just the realization where it's just, I can't just rely on everything coming from one place. Having multiple streams of revenue that come from different places means that I can keep my system operating. And the better I can reinforce that system, and I'm making steps right now that are going to become much more apparent over the summer, I think, that to further reinforce my system and bring in a few more like, lines of revenue that then allow me to like reach the next level of what I want to do. And then potentially, like, right now, so much of what I do is based on the fact that I'm a high output writer. But at some point, like, I'm 35 right now. I think in my 40s, I would like to be able to like take 3 months off, occasionally, just to like read a bunch of books and like let my brain rest. I don't know if like my brain would allow me to do that, but it's just like, it's nice to, it would be nice to have the option. But right now I can't do that. Like, I need to work fairly constantly, and I'm willing to do that. I don't feel like I'm burning myself out. If anything, I've gotten a lot better at balancing a little bit of life in there, and also like, I'm doing boxing lessons 3 times a week, so it's just like I'm getting into decent shape finally. I'm trying to not just like burn out, but it's, I want, like, right now I do need to like keep working. I always have, there's always a script that I need to be writing, and I'm able to do that for a time. but my entire business model can't rely on me being able to write like more than basically six scripts a month sometimes, and sometimes even more than that.
It's the sustainability. You want to make sure that you don't, the history of comics is filled with people who were busy, but when they stopped being busy, they got into a tough spot. And like that is one of the sad stories of comics. And it seems like you're trying to protect yourself. So if that ever came up, you would be a little bit more protected than that.
Well, and it's like protected on two fronts. I want to be protected so that I can still make the decisions about the sort of work that I want to do in the way that I'm able to make them now. And like, my hope is that whenever the day comes that I go back to superheroes, it's because I want to go back to superheroes, not because I have to. Because like otherwise my I'm not going to be able to like pay my rent. That I don't want. Like, so it's just like it's building that system, and then it's also it's I want a nice life, and I want to make the most of this. And then on top of that, it's also just like I do have like kind of evangelical thoughts about what I think comics should look like and what sort of comics I want supported in the market. And I have the ability to support those comics even if I'm not writing them. So it's just like I am trying to engineer titles that I think should exist and would sell. And that's what Christopher Chaos is. That's what Blue Book is. That's like, I think there's a market for these books, and so I'm putting them into the market to find out if there's a market for them. And if there is, I will replicate this model.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer James Tynion IV. You can find him on his Substack and his work in World Tree, Nightmare Country, Something is Killing the Children, Department of Truth, and more. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Darcy Van Polges, Kevin Bides, Tom Evans, Natalie Mockery, Travis Gibb, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian, Christo Ray, Near Levy, Dennis Hoffman, Jason Hussa, Cancel Comics, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Tynion IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Damstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Brian, Submen Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Massell, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Nick Bennett, Birdcage Comics Cafe, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Stephen Hall, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grumbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Ta, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Nick Polito, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Paul McMahon, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Adam Highfill, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the song's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out both their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.